How are we doing? Everybody having a good weekend? Yeah? Awesome. I wanted to talk a little bit about this before I get started. I've done this panel for 5 years now, and conventions all over New England, but this is always my favorite convention to do it at. This is where it happened first. Even with filling a room at Anime Boston of like 300 or 400 people, I still love doing it here because y'all are great. And this has been a constantly evolving and changing panel, just as the conversation surrounding LGBT issues all over the world is constantly evolving and changing. To be honest, I'm pretty surprised that folks let a cis person cis-plain LGBT issues for 2 hours, which is pretty wild. Thank you very much for, how many people are new who have never attended before? A fair amount of you. I see some familiar faces, but it's also great to see some new faces as well. For folks who have seen this before, as I mentioned, there is some new information. There's some upcoming stuff that I get to talk about here, which is very exciting. Because it's always good to see new titles that deserve the attention get put out there for the world to see. So, I think I'm gonna get started. Are you folks okay with that? All right, cool. So my name is Gabriel. This is my Portcon. Again, I've been doing this panel for a number of years, and I'm glad that I get to do it again with all of you. The first thing I want to preface is that all I'm trying to do is start a conversation about the way that LGBT issues and characters and concepts are represented within anime. I'm not trying to put you down for liking something I consider gross or other people consider gross. I'm just trying to, again, I'm trying to start a conversation, and I don't think there is, even anime that I like or that you may like, I don't think it's above any kind of criticism. So as I recommend titles to you, I will say, however, the caveat is, it's kind of boring, or something like that, you know? So it's, you can like whatever you want, just so long as you're okay with accepting criticism of it, because it's important for us to be doing that. That's how media changes. That's how, if we are able to have a conversation about it, that's how media changes for the better. So, on the docket today, we have representation as a concept and how it plays into society as a whole. We're going to talk about some of the sociological stuff behind representation as a concept. We're going to talk about Japan, the current events of what's going on over there. Grab my water here. And we're going to talk about how LGBT stuff plays into Japan as a whole. We're going to talk about the anime industry, how that works and how that plays into this whole conversation. And then I get to recommend a bunch of stuff to you. A bunch of titles that I think are doing the right thing when it comes to representing LGBT issues and characters in a good way. So, let's get started. Hello, how are you? Representation, as defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is the description or portrayal of something or someone in a particular way or as being of a certain nature. That sounds very redundant, doesn't it? Basically, it's the way that ideas and people are portrayed, regardless of the media. The example that Merriam-Webster gives is the representation of women in politics. And that can mean any number of things. It could be the representation of women who are politicians. It could be the way that women are represented in political issues. It could be the way that the women are represented as a voter demographic within politics. It can mean any number one of those things. And I only mention this because I am specifically restricting this discussion to LGBT representation within anime in a lot of cases, or some cases, some manga as well. So that is kind of what I am restricting this conversation to sort of give us a framework for how we talk about this sort of stuff. So we can talk about representation as a concept and being important, but how can we actually apply it to everyday life? Well, this is something that a mid-20s sociologist named George Gerbner was working on. He passed about 10 years ago. And one of the theories that he developed, and what is considered to be one of the most trusted theories within mass media studies, is cultivation theory. Cultivation theory very simply states that television shapes concepts of social reality. Social reality being your individual perception of the world. This graph here shows that viewing television, learning, along with any incidental information that may come from it, builds your social reality, but it's not just television. Obviously, humans are very complex beings with different backgrounds, and we're all different with how we learn and where we come from and how we take in information and process it. So it accounts for that as well. And that is, it's a constantly evolving thing. The social reality may change depending on, but all that cultivation theory does is implies that TV plays a more essential part than it ever did. This theory was developed in the late 60s when televisions were becoming a very household item. That's something that is sort of required in most houses nowadays in this country. It really serves as the basis for representation. Even nowadays, where there's so many different ways to consume television, we can sort of come back to cultivation theory as the umbrella theory for representation as a tangible product. And in one of the byproducts of representation that gets tossed around a lot when you study this subject is mean world syndrome. This applies to a study that was done for about 400 different inner city school children in New Jersey in 1972. There was a control group that watched 1 hour of television per night, and this includes syndicated news programs, action TV programs, that sort of stuff, and a group of school children that consumed more than 1 hour. And they found that the group that had consumed more than 1 hour were polled as being more afraid of the outside world, more sort of pessimistic in their worldviews of how, how certain issues can be sensationalized by a lot of syndicated news programs, and how violence can be sort of exaggerated in a lot of TV programs. So that is one of the real-world applications of cultivation theory that we can talk about. So now that we've established sort of the concept and the sociological implications of representation, we need to talk about representation versus visibility. Now, I see a lot of different programs that have visible LGBT presence, like a show like Yuri on Ice, which has visible LGBT characters. Do not ask me any questions about Yuri on Ice, by the way. This is not the discussion you want to have with me. But in Western media, we can look at the visibility of a character like Bruno. Bruno is a movie that came out about 10 years ago with Sacha Baron Cohen, in which he undercover played a fake gay Swedish model, and it sort of is like a bunch of hidden camera interactions with like a photo shoot and executives for pitching him as the next big model for the face of their product and stuff like that. And it was widely panned due to the fact that his portrayal of a homosexual person was seen as poor representation, that it relied a lot on stereotypes that homosexual men are flamboyant, eccentric, they're sexually deviant. All of these different ways that sort of paint a negative image of homosexual men, especially for what was considered funny in the mid-2000s. As opposed to representation in a character like Lionel here from Dear White People. How many of you have watched Dear White People? Phenomenal show. Phenomenal show. Lionel is a character that is a young black man that comes to terms with his own sexuality in the first season and comes out as gay, but he is a very complicated character. Though he may seem shy and reserved on the outside, on the inside he is a journalist who is dedicated to finding the source and the truth, and that comes up multiple times throughout the show. Both the movie Dear White People and the 2 seasons of Dear White People that have come out so far on Netflix have done a commendable job in presenting homosexuality within black men, which in our society, toxic masculinity is very prevalent within that demographic, so for it to be carefully crafting this character to present homosexuality in an unconventional way for our society has been seen as excellent representation, and I would definitely check out that show if you're interested. So now that we've kind of established the differences between visibility and representation, let's talk about Japan. Japan is in a very complicated spot right now because there is sort of this conflict of ideologies between a generation that has been accustomed to hundreds of years of isolationist mentality, of remaining, going to school, getting good grades, going to a good college, getting a good job, starting a family, and really devoting your life to the work that you do. There is this incoming generation of folks who don't necessarily subscribe to those ideas. And it's because of that that the Japanese population has, over the past 15 years, declined by more than 1 million people. And that is an issue that the Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, has taken into serious account. And he's tried to present all these different ways for younger Japanese folks to start having kids again. Now, this is largely, there's been a lot of pushback on this issue by younger folks because of shifting gender roles. Women don't necessarily want to be housewives. Men don't want to necessarily go to work and work for the rest of their lives in a job that they most likely hate. This is something that gets brought up in the, have any of you seen Agretsuko yet? Yeah, that's one of the foundating reasons that Retsuko as a character was created was because it wanted to be, Sanrio wanted to make a statement about work culture in Japan and how there's this younger generation who is kind of sick of it, and they want to subscribe to more Western ideas and concepts, including the representation of LGBT folks within mainstream Japan. Over the past 5 years or so, 7 of the 40-plus prefectures have recognized same-sex couples in varying degrees, whether that's a certificate of partnership or as proper marriage. But even still, folks who don't subscribe to the gender binary and trans people sort of get left to the wayside in the discussion. Even within the Japanese spoken language, there isn't really a term that we could equivalent to transness. It's always using the phrase of wishing to become X gender. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely something that has begun to develop over the past few years, but it's still a subject that doesn't necessarily get covered. I don't really get into much more of Japan as a culture, but I will provide you a couple of different people whose work that you should definitely check out if you're interested in these issues at all. The first being Hourou Masuhara. Masuhara is one of the first women to receive a same-sex couple certificate with her former partner. They are no longer together. But the work that she has done in LGBT activism within Japan has been fundamental in making sure that these issues are represented and being voted upon and being executed and carried out. I believe last month, Masuhara revealed that she was in a relationship with the most powerful businesswoman in Japan, who had then come out as bisexual. Power moves. Honestly, she's a wonderful person, and her work should definitely get a spotlight here. In terms of non-Japanese folks, I've covered this person in years past, specific pieces of work from them, but Graham Colbains is a Canadian LGBT filmmaker and writer who has penned at least a dozen novels pertaining to various parts of LGBT culture within Japan that doesn't necessarily get a lot of attention. Some of his books include Massive, Gay Erotica, and The Men Who Created. He just finished post-production on directing a documentary called Queer Japan, which I've featured in in past panels. That is wrapping up production, and they're actually going to take it to festival circuits later this year, which is very exciting. If you want to check out more of his work, grahamcolbains.com. He's another invaluable resource to the subject of LGBT culture in Japan. So shifting away from that a little bit, let's talk about the anime industry. This is a video that I found a few years ago from a YouTuber named Digibro. I believe his channel is called Otaku Gonzo Journalism. He is one of the best if not the best anime YouTubers doing what they do right now. I would also include Mother's Basement in that discussion. Both of those channels are excellent resources. I got permission to use this video from him a few years ago. Shout out to you, did you, bro? This is about a 6 or 7 minute video. We're only gonna watch the first couple of minutes. But this video is called Why Good Anime is Hard to Make. So you get the idea. The anime industry is first and foremost a business. Any adaptation that is being pitched to an anime studio they have to have a business sensibility about it. How many books did this sell? How many copies of this light novel have sold? So it's important for studios to be able to invest in projects that they can subsequently make their money back on. That's why when you go to Hummingbird or Inichart for the upcoming season, you see like 12,000 shows about girls in high school who are in clubs and do nothing but be cute. That's what sells in Japan. That's what people buy the merchandise for. So for a lot of LGBT titles, a lot of the more popular ones, titles like Junjo Romantica, or Love Stage, or Citrus, or Sakura Trick, will get anime adaptations because they have the numbers behind them. So a lot of these smaller projects that may have better representation don't necessarily get made because a studio doesn't want to make a risk on it. Because anime is expensive, y'all. And though we are in a bubble right now in terms of the amount of anime getting made, there's still the business decision that has to be made. Some studios, in order to broaden their audience scope, will take the opportunity to incorporate certain concepts into their shows that may not necessitate a representation or even visibility, but still have a wide LGBT following for any number of reasons. The first one of these two concepts I'm going to get into is a little concept I like to call queerbaiting. Queerbaiting is in a lot of anime, and even in a lot of Western media. It's why Supernatural has 27 seasons. Queerbaiting is the concept, if you're not in the know, of having two otherwise assumed heterosexual characters be portrayed as interacting in a way that can be implicitly interpreted by somebody with an active imagination as being in a sexual or romantic relationship. You see in a lot of this, it's why Free is so popular, it's why Haikyuu is so popular, it's why sports anime is so popular. It's because a lot of folks watch this show and see these moments and they're like, oh yeah, they're together. Yep. And they buy the merchandise. It's to get you to spend more money, believe it or not. Wild, I know, they're tricking you. It can't be considered good representation because it's not even good visibility. It's nothing. It's a trick to get folks to spend more money on merchandise. I can concede that it's not a bad business decision, but it still is dishonest, and I think that's worth mentioning. The other main concept in which titles will incorporate LGBT stuff in an implicit way is queer coding. Now, this is a concept that goes back a couple of decades of incorporating LGBT concepts or stereotypes onto characters who were seen as evil or bad. A very common Western cartoon example that I like to give of queer coding is Scar from The Lion King. Let's be real. Be prepared, let's be real. Maximilian Pegasus and even James from the Pokemon dubs were given very flamboyant, effeminate voices to associate them as being bad and to associate that trait as being bad. That is something our brains do because our brains are really lazy. This is Katamari from Rurouni Kenshin. Katamari presents as a different gender because he is in love with his boss, who is the main villain of the second main arc of the manga. And it's because of that that his romantic devotion to that character that he presents in a way. And in the manga, it is so problematic. If you've read that manga, he has a fight scene with Yahiko that is like, ugh, not great. So with all that being said, a lot of bad happens sometimes, but believe it or not, there is some good out of all of this, and I'm here to tell you about it. So, who wants some recommendations? Anybody? Yeah? Cool. Awesome. So I've gone through, initially there were 5, but there are just too many that I have to recommend at this point. So these are several series that I would recommend for having proper representation, and we'll break down each title and go into why I think it works, and contrast it with some stuff that necessarily doesn't work. So the first title I'm going to recommend is a Shonen Ai film that came out 2 years ago. It was licensed. It is available in North America if you have the money for it. It is a film called Doukyusei. Doukyusei is a 2016 film from A1 Pictures. You might recognize their name. They worked on a little show called, I don't know if you've ever heard it, Sword Art Online? Yes.
Doukyusei, like a parody of Sword Art Online abridged or something?
Doukyusei, this is an incredible studio making a really, really, really good Shonen Ai film. The original mangaka's artistic style carries through. It's got a little bit of clamp with the tree people aspect of it, but it isn't distracting. The art style is actually very gentle, sort of this concept of slowly, gently falling in love. You saw it in the trailer. The music was done by a virtuoso steel guitar player named Kotaro Oshio, which is really cool. The score is beautiful. The voice acting is really good. I get distracted, I smile, because the guy who voices the blonde character, I don't know if any of you have seen Polar Bear Cafe, he's also the voice of Penguin. So when he's yelling like that, all I can hear is, Penguin-san! It's a little distracting. What I like about this title is that it completely does away with the trope of uke versus seimei. How many of you have heard of that? For those of you who haven't, I'll get to it in just a moment. It is still super tropey. I described it last night in one of my other panels as the Tumblr AU you wish you wrote. And you can buy it on Blu-ray through Aniplex. It is kind of expensive because Aniplex releases are kind of expensive. I had to use the excuse of buying it for myself for my birthday, but it does come with a bunch of bonus features. It comes with a brand new one-shot manga that was done by the mangaka that serves as kind of an in-between for 2 chapters. It comes with some really, really nice postcards and some extras, a lot of good extra stuff. Definitely a really, really decent Blu-ray release for this one. Let's talk about the uke seimei trope. So, uke and seimei are 2 terms that fujoshi largely associate with 2 main characters of a shonen ai or yaoi. The uke is the character you can see here, and here, and here, and here, as being sort of younger, more effeminate looking, having softer facial features, usually in a lower financial tax bracket than their counterparts, usually not as susceptible to homosexual advances, while the seimei is sort of like the older character. They're more financially successful, they have secured jobs, and usually the job of the seimei is to force themselves upon the uke in a lot of situations in order to make them realize their sexuality and fall in love with them. What I like about Doukyusei is that it completely does away with that. And it's both characters, as you can see here, have equally masculine and feminine features. Neither one of them plays in any role. They're just really 2 awkward young boys who are like awkwardly fall in love with each other and then awkwardly decide they're going to stay together. It's a really, really authentic, gentle, wonderful film that I really like, that I think you should check out if you have the funds for it. I kind of wanted to touch a little bit upon fujoshi culture and gender roles. Fujoshi, for those of you who aren't familiar, are the main perpetrators of producing, distributing, and consuming a lot of shonen ai, BL, and yaoi. Fujoshi quite literally translates to rotten woman, which means women are the ones who are predominantly writing and consuming pieces of yaoi and BL that feature men in this way. They kind of make fun of it in a show called Kiss Him Not Me, which I think Funimation licensed. And the reason that I've spoken with Fujoshi on this subject in the past, and the way that their justification for depicting men in this way is to breach gender roles. And the way that men who are normally so rigid and masculine as being depicted in a lot of Japanese content get to sort of explore femininity. And I think I have come up with a counter-argument for a way that a show can do that without having to resort to this. This is a character named Yakumo from an anime that came out a couple years ago called Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju. It's kind of a mouthful. It's on Crunchyroll. In the show, Yakumo is the first season is largely a flashback of how this master of a style of comedy called Rakugo came to be, and how he sort of ascended to that masterhood. So at one point, he finds that his Rakugo has become stagnant, that he's not growing at all as an artist, as a performer, and so he goes into performing live theater. The show that he is cast in, he plays a man who is disguised as a woman for political benefit. And it is very clear this isn't like a problematic aspect at all. This is just the plot of the show. As Yakumo goes on stage pretending to be a woman, he finds that the audience is completely transfixed on him and his femininity. And he finds that there is power in that, because that is something that he can use to his advantage. And he's like, that's what I'm missing. That's what my Rakugo needs. So as he goes to perform, he performs a lot of stories within Rakugo that feature feminine and women voices, whether they be comedic or erotic. He decides that that's the next step that he needs to take to progress as an artist. And I think that that's a very healthy and conducive way of a man exploring his femininity in a way that isn't harmful to men. So that's just an example I wanted to give to sort of present a counter-argument to a lot of Fujoshi justifications. So we're going to move on to our next recommendation. This is a shoujo-ai that came out about 10 years ago. That is called Sweet Blue Flowers. Sweet Blue Flowers is a 12-episode anime that came out in 2009. It was licensed by Nozomi Entertainment. One of their sub-prints is Lucky Penny Entertainment. I believe the last time I checked, it was available on Nozomi Entertainment's YouTube channel, but you can also buy the show for relatively cheap from Right Stuff, their warehouse anime website. Definitely not an Aniplex release, it's definitely much cheaper, and it is worth the watch, I think. It's a shoujo-ai that doesn't necessarily rely on the objectification of women and young girls to tell a story, and I think that that ultimately benefits it. It is a slow-moving show. If you're looking for a high-action, high-octane, action-packed drama, you're not going to get it. It's a high school drama. It's a high school drama romance about two young girls who were friends at one point in their childhood who reunite as they find that they take the same subway to go to different high schools. So, yeah, so it's sort of their awkward fumbling through romance. One of the main characters has romantic feelings for multiple genders, which makes her bisexual. Bisexuality is a thing. I shouldn't have to say that, but apparently some of the worst discrimination in the LGBT culture comes towards bisexual people. And I don't prescribe to that in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, you're welcome. I got you. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the male gaze playing an aspect in shoujo-ai. This is from Sakura Trick, which is a shoujo-ai with a lot of that in it. That's animated by Studio Dean. Typical. A lot of it, that's a child. I mean, it feels like I shouldn't have to explain it, but the way that young girls have enhanced body features in order to get men to watch it to broaden the audience, instead of making it for women who might be LGBT that want a story about LGBT girls. I get to talk about something else that's coming out literally in a couple of weeks. It's making its American debut. It's an OVA that is called Kase-san and Morning Glories, which I'm very, very excited to talk about. Yeah, do you think they're, this isn't queer baiting, right?
No. They're VVA.
They're cousins. Kase-san and Morning Glories is a full-length OVA film from Studio Zexus. It's based off of a, can you believe it? It's a LGBT title based off of a successful one-shot manga about teens in high school. Wow, we literally didn't just hear about that, right? Yeah, so you can buy the manga. Kase-san and Morning Glories and its sequels are available through 7 Seas Entertainment. Anime Expo in 2 weeks will be showing this, the US premiere of this film, which is very exciting, so we can expect some licensing and distribution announcements soon. So stick to that. The OVA film is actually only going to adapt the second half of the manga because the first half was already adapted into a short film, which we're gonna watch right now. She ran in track, she was gay, what more can I say? Oh! I love this look right here, just like, oh no. I think I'm gay. Aggressively. 2 words. Oh my god. I love her socks.
Where's the mom? Give me that.
Stop it!
If you have the mama jug up, what time you need to use it? I should it!
They dating. They dating. How many of you were at Geek Sexuality last night?
How did they not drown?
Ganbatte!
Fair.
Yes! Keep in mind, this is a manga you can buy right now.
What?
It's called Kase-san and Morning Glories, and it's an ongoing manga series. Very, very cute. It's like checking off every tick box for an anime. They sit in the hill. They do the shout together. They're like, ah, shout. She's like, what a coincidence. I too am thirsty. This is all the gay energy they're sending out into the atmosphere. Gay energy is the leading factor in climate change, isn't it? So this is something you can watch whenever you want on Pony Canyon's YouTube page. That is available literally whenever you want want to watch it. The OVA will come out later this year. Sometime this year or next year, probably. I don't know. They haven't announced anything yet. Keep your eyes on Anime Expo. That's where it's happening.
Oh, that was great.
So the next title I want to transition to is an anime that came out a few years ago, and it's called Wandering Sun. Wandering Sun is a 2011 anime from Studio AIC. It was directed by one of my favorite directors, Aoki. He also directed Fate Zero, one of my favorite animes ever.
Oh my god, same!
Yeah. There, yay! Wandering Sun is about two trans children who are assigned different genders at birth, and their journey towards transitioning and understanding themselves and each other and the world around them. I get really emotional talking about this show because trans issues are very, very dear to me.
Oh, hi.
I love you, you're valid, trans lives matter, etc., etc. I'll get that out of the way. The reason why I love this show so much is because it really doesn't pull any punches with the different perspectives that come with coming out and beginning transitions. This is something as a cis person I could never personally identify with, but based on the feedback that I've gotten from trans and non-binary folks who have seen the show, that it is a very honest interpretation. If I were to critique it at all, I think a lot of the plot happens a little bit too conveniently. It sort of takes a few liberties with how things happen in the story, but it is fully available to watch on Crunchyroll. If you have an account, it's totally free to sign up. They give you 14 days. You can binge a 12-episode anime in 14 days. I believe in you. The director of the show recently did an interview with Anime News Network, which, if you don't read any of their stuff, they're incredibly supportive of the LGBT community. One of their senior writers, Jacob Chapman, is a trans man who got to interview Ai Aoki, and there's a great moment where they talk about Wandering Sun, and he comes out to the director, and it's very, very heartwarming and wholesome. I would definitely, this is probably the hardest recommendation I can make out of any of the titles that I go through today. I want to talk a little bit about honest depiction of trans character. Okay. Girl Sutcliffe is a trans woman. That's not a radical statement. That's real. That's 100% accurate. I wanted to talk a little bit because a lot of folks associate trans characters with the concept of cross-dressing, which is kind of a negative implication. The example that I use is Naoto from Persona 4. Naoto, a deeply complicated character, but a problematic one all the same, and it's something we need to talk about. Excuse me. One of the main themes of Persona 4 is, one of the main statements is about gender roles. Naoto is a girl who presents as a boy to be taken seriously among the detectives in the police force that she works for while investigating the Midnight Channel murders. This sense of, while Naoto is a very interesting and complicated character, this does send the negative implication that trans people are merely cross-dressers who want to present as a different gender for their own personal gain, and that's something that needs to change. Even with the anime adaptation of Kuro Shitsuji, I found that the adaptation of Growl, especially in the voice dub, is deeply problematic and not even remotely emblematic of her as a character in the manga, because she rules in the manga, and she's a great character in the manga. So I wanted to kind of touch on that before moving on. The next one is a yaoi title that is 18+. We'll show the trailer for it here. This is a title, oh, I'm not doing that yet apparently. The presentation's like, no. Iaesu is a manga that I would recommend that it's a slice of life manga series that deals with different anecdotes, different short stories of intersex people living in Japan and going about their everyday lives. And it had a TV drama in 2011 that you can check out as well, that I would also recommend. Now we're going to move on to a yaoi called Winter Cicada. For those of you who have seen this panel, y'all know what time it is. This is a roller coaster, folks.
It's like a mix of
beautiful animation. Just stunning. I struck you down, gay, gay. You hit the ground, gay, gay.
Yay.
You gay, you gay. He's here. He's gay. Get used to it. Hey, my son's gay. Watch it. Watch it. Welcome to Relax, he's just hibernating.
I don't think that's where you go hibernating. Yeah, it's called being dead.
Winter Cicada is a 3-episode yaoi OVA by Studio Vanette, who I'm sure you know is well known for their amazing animation. It was licensed by Media Blasters, who licensed a bunch of porn. But this is actually a really, really interesting title. It actually is set during the end of the warring states that Japan experienced for hundreds of years when they were a series of clans all fighting each other. And they united under one centralized government in the mid-1860s, began what is known as the Meiji era. Some people wanted this, some people didn't. Imagine that.
There's a point, it's actually the early 1600s that it happened. This unification ended after the 1860s with the United States getting involved.
I stand corrected. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No,
I learned something today. Obviously, there's no uke or seme trope in sight. It's two burly, handsome, beautiful boys who just happen to be on the wrong side of the battlefield. And believe it or not, this is a yaoi that actually has a consensual phrase. Who needs a refresher on consent? Hi, what's up?
Well, I was going to say the author, the mangaka who originally created that, like most of what she does has a limited amount of UK semi-tropes, and a lot of her couples are reversible, including that couple.
Excellent.
Like that Winter Cicada, if you don't know, is the plot of a movie 2 actors from the manga are in. So this is a movie and those 2 actors are a reversible couple.
That's awesome. So yeah, there is a consensual phrase. Not a lot of yaoi has it. Do y'all want to see it? Yeah? Because I'm about to show you the consensual phrase. This is mildly spicy. Mild, not too spicy. Not quite salt level of spicy, but here you go. Light a fire deep inside. God, it's hot in here. And there's actually a new adult title that I get to talk about that is debuting in a couple of weeks. That is actually a really, really anticipated show for a lot of people that aren't necessarily LGBT. This is a title called Banana Fish. Let me explain. So this is based off of a manga that is a highly influential yaoi title that happened in the mid-80s leading up to the early 90s. It's popular because it was one of the first yaoi titles that wasn't necessarily aiming towards women. It is a shoujo manga, but it is a shoujo manga about gang violence and gunfights and government conspiracies and the mafia. So a lot of men found a lot of appeal despite there being a romantic relationship between, can you guess? So this is a story about a young man named Ash Lynx that is his name, whose older brother is essentially a vegetable after a number of years ago he had served in the Vietnam War, and at one point he had taken a machine gun and turned to fire on members of his troop, and when the gun was taken away from him, he was in a catatonic state, and all he said was the phrase, "banana fish." So his brother, with the help of Japanese journalist Eiji, seek to investigate the meaning behind this banana fish phenomena that has happened to not only his brother, but several other members of the military. So it's a banana fish, right? I know. Weird premise, but this is a high-octane crime thriller. It has 24 episodes. The trailer is a little bit too graphic for this panel, so I can't show it to you, but you're more than welcome to look it up on YouTube. You can watch it. I believe the manga has been licensed by Viz Media. It's currently being translated. It'll probably, the first volume will be out sometime this summer to coincide with the release of the anime, which is from Studio Mappa. You might have heard of them based on that one ice skating show I don't like, as well as Terror in Resonance, as well as a couple of other shows. Kids on the Slope was, I think, their first show. Definitely, if you're going to look into the manga, it is definitely not for children. There's violence, there's gunfights, there's non-consensual sex scenes that are accurately portrayed as being gross and disgusting, because they are. So if you're looking for a little bit of a different take on the yaoi genre, definitely check this one out. It'll be streaming on Amazon Video, for those of you who want to catch the anime as it's simulcasting. So the last title I want to talk to you about today is one of my favorite animes from last year. It completely took me by surprise for a number of different reasons, and I think that you'll like it too. This is a title called Made in Abyss. Made in Abyss is a 13-episode series that debuted last year from Kinema Citrus. They're a relatively new studio. This show is incredible with the way that it builds its entire world and follows its own rules and develops its characters. It really is a fascinating world that I cannot wait to see more of. The story follows a young girl named Riko who lives in a society on the surface of the planet overlooking a giant chasm known as the Abyss. And she trains to be what's known as a cave raider, who goes down, somebody who goes down into the abyss to find relics to sell for money to help sustain the civilization that they live in. But the problem with the abyss is that it has a curse attached to it. So depending on how far down you go, if you go back up, the curse will take hold. So if you go in like the first layer of the abyss, the curse will make you feel sick. The problem is her mother. She receives a letter from her mother, who she believes to be dead, but is still alive at the bottom of the abyss. So she and her new friend, Reg, decide to run away, go down into the abyss, and go find her mother. The problem is, if you go down far enough in the abyss, the curse will literally kill you if you try to ascend. So there's this entire world with its own mythos that's like, based on that description alone, I was like, okay, I'm here, I'm ready. What more can you tell me?
I'm here and I'm queer.
I'm here, I'm queer, and I'm giving an ear. So this was licensed by Sentai Filmworks. It is getting a home video release soon, but it has been kind of delayed. So you can go check it out on Amazon Video for now. Other streaming services like High Dive to follow once the dub is ready. If you want to read the manga, I believe it'll be licensed soon. The manga is incredibly problematic compared to the anime, so if you're looking for something a bit more palatable, then definitely check out the anime. I will say its cute art style betrays itself a little bit because it does have some hyper-realistic depictions of violence and blood and stuff. So just be prepared for that when you get to see it. But the reason why it's on this list and why I wanted to include it in this title is because of its dedication to gender neutrality. So we have two characters here. One of them is, their name is Marolk, and the other here is Nanachi. Nanachi did nothing wrong. Neither of these characters have a gender. And it isn't given any sort of special attention other than them just not presenting in any other way. So the gentleman who is translating the anime for Sentai Filmworks and the gentleman who is translating the manga for Seven Seas Entertainment is the same person. And he recently did an interview where he talked about the translation process for Made in Abyss and how he was dedicated to preserving the gender-neutral status of both of these characters, which I think we don't really see a lot of in a lot of titles. There are exceptions to the rule. I believe there's a character from Attack on Titan.
Yeah.
There's a character from Krona from Soul Eater is another gender-neutral character, but this is the first time where an American company has been like, yeah, they don't have a gender. They don't need one. So, all the more reason to check this show out. I adore Made in Abyss, and I cannot wait to see. It is getting continued in one form or another. I've heard from one source it's going to be a movie. I've heard from another source it's going to be a second season. But it is getting continued, so I cannot wait to check out more of Made in Abyss. So, what did we learn? This was a lot, fam. Thank you so much for sitting through it and sticking through all of the hiccups that happened. Representation is important and a very real part of our society. Japan is doing all right. It's getting there, but it's still got some ways to go. You can like whatever you want as long as you don't exempt it from criticism. Consent is important. This panel is possible because I've talked to folks who gave me feedback and said, hey, you should maybe suggest this instead of this, or saying, by suggesting this, this is not really indicative of the subject, and I've 100% receptive to changing whatever needs to be changed. Support your industry. Find legal sources to watch your anime. Buy titles you love a lot. And give money to shows that can have good representation. And y'all look great. Did I just mention that? Y'all are just so cute. Y'all are awesome. So, I'm done. If you want to follow me, I'm on Tumblr and Facebook at Gooberplex. That's me as a cat. I paid $5 for that. So, we have some time, I think. Yeah, hi.
What is your sexuality?
So I identify as a word that most people consider a slur that starts with a Q that I have personally reclaimed. Hi.
I'm queer too.
Cool. Are we okay if I say that word?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm queer. I'm really queer, and that's just what makes sense for me. Right on. Hi. Hi, yes, you with the blue hair.
I'm just so glad that I have something to like identify me from everyone else. Thoughts on Nagisa from Assassination Classroom?
I actually haven't watched Assassination Classroom.
Arma's the best.
Should I check it out? Is that something I should look into potentially?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And that's Funimation, right?
Yeah.
Funimation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, you in the back here.
You've seen number 6.
Number 6, yes.
You originally had that on
I have included number 6 in the past. I think Inakashi as a character is important, but I just felt when comparing it to Made in Abyss, how much attention they draw to Inakashi as somebody without a gender, just the way that Shion has to look down their shirt, and yeah. I just felt like in terms of really representing and giving a spotlight to gender-neutral characters, I thought Made in Abyss as a show executed that just a little bit better. But I love number 6. It's one of the titles that I own. The Fiona in the back there.
What do you regard as some of your favorite LGBT representatives in Western media? For example, Willow and Tara from Vampire Slayer.
Dear White People, as I mentioned before, is phenomenal. I used to feature How to Get Away with Murder because they were the first TV show to have an LGBT couple deal with HIV on primetime television. So I think that that's important as well. I like Moonlight. If y'all haven't seen Moonlight, it is a phenomenal movie that deals with a lot of the issues that are presented in Dear White People. The director of Moonlight actually directed the best episode of season 1 of Dear White People, and you'll know which one that is. Hi, this one with the Wigu right here. Hello, yes?
I was using the mic, but it doesn't seem to be on. You can turn it on. I turned it on. More up.
this it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi.
that's
What's up?
So the queer baiting slide, I definitely know that sports anime is popular because of all the boys and everything that people portray onto, like project onto the boys. Free was made because they put out one commercial and everyone was like, wow, this is really gay, make the whole thing.
Yeah!
I want to just like have a little debate with you about Haikyuu being on the slide because I know the whole fandom, like, obviously it's popular because of that, but I don't think there's very much like actual queer baiting in the show. I don't think it's trying to be that. I think it just is that because people see all of the boys.
And I think that's fair. And when I judge a title for being queer bait material, I judge it for the audience reaction to it. Obviously, no matter what, there's going to be a subset of every single fandom that has to ship people no matter what. But Haikyuu has the most fan fiction on Archive of Our Own for an anime title. Like,
that's a lot of boys.
By far. And you know, with it being such an expansive cast of multiple volleyball teams, it's not necessarily that the show is bad. I watched 2 seasons of Haikyuu and really enjoyed it. I think it goes really, really in depth in terms of explaining the concepts that go into volleyball and really fleshes out a lot of the characters in each match. It does kind of suffer a little bit from Dragon Ball Z syndrome, where it takes 12 episodes to play one friggin' match of volleyball.
Season 3 was one match.
What's that?
Season 3 was one match, so I understand.
What?
It was really good.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from with why I include Haikyuu on that slide.
Oh yeah, I understand. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I'm glad that we got to do that. Yeah, so you've got one. Okay, cool.
What is your opinion of From the New World if you've seen it?
I think From the New World is on the same level of Made in Abyss in terms of world building and character development, especially in Saki and Satoru. I think that for the rules that the world prescribes onto children, you're talking, of course, about episode 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything else.
So for those of you who haven't seen From the New World, it's a dystopian sci-fi anime about a group of kids who grew up in a post-apocalyptic society where telepathy is a thing and kinetic powers with the mind happen. And at one point during the show, there is a period of time where the children go through puberty. And the adults who heavily regulate the upbringing of these children for reasons you'll come to find out later in the show, allow them to basically go hog wild with their sexuality. So there are multiple LGBT relationships that occur between the characters, but it's largely seen as a phase within the society because for its own reasons, these people need to procreate because there's not a lot of them left. So that's kind of, I see it as like, we can let them do it for a while, but ultimately they have responsibilities and they have their own duties that they need to fulfill in order to continue living. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you think that was influenced by Greek culture?
I would have to, I watched the show and it was simulcasting. I would need to rewatch it again, which, Thomas, let's get on that. Yes, hi, you with the glasses.
So in terms of Western like shows representation of Q, so it's actually based as draws some inspiration from Magical Girl. Has the main character is male, but and when in one it's Steven Universe, just putting that out there.
Steven Universe, okay. Yeah, I don't watch Steven Universe, but that does go without saying, that it is important LGBT representation. One of my karaoke songs is It's Over, Isn't It? And maybe if you go to... if you add me on Facebook, I do have a video of me performing it. And I think it's on Reddit somewhere, so... yeah, Steven Universe. Let's go to someone who hasn't been called on yet. Can I have how about this dipper right here? Yeah.
Wendy, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's alright. I was a little late for this. Did you talk about the host club?
I didn't talk about host club, no.
Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I'm welcome to. Honestly, Ouran, I think, is vastly overrated, but still, at the end of the day, has some good messages about gender roles and about sexuality as a whole. I think the visibility of Haruhi's dad being a cross-dresser is important. I don't necessarily care for a lot of the execution. Tamaki sort of playing this bisexual host character. I understand that host culture is very prevalent in Japan and they serve the needs of their clients. I just don't necessarily agree with it, and it's not something I really look for when I give this sort of talk and that sort of thing. But it does have its place in this discussion, I think. So thank you for the question. Who's next?
In ReZero, I'm sure you probably already know what I'm about to talk about.
I actually don't, because I didn't watch that one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Please, educate me.
Well, okay. There's a character whose name is pronounced differently by everyone who says it, but I'm going to go with Ferris. Is portrayed very interestingly. Like, a lot of the anime and parts of the manga portray her as a cross-dressing man, but then there was a light novel that said she was a trans girl, and like, I don't know. It's an interesting situation.
Ferris is the character's name?
Yes.
So I'm going to put that on my list of stuff to investigate for next year. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. And I think that's a character that's a little bit more relevant than Naruto that we could talk about. Persona 4 came out 10 years ago. ReZero is a relatively popular series from these past couple of years, so I think it could do with a little bit of updating, and I'd be happy to look more into that. So thank you for bringing it to my attention. Ah, perfect. Hi, CL.
Hi. I remember you said that you considered like haiku queer baiting, but like, would you consider Yuri and Ice queer baiting even though there are canon relationships?
I was hoping we didn't have to do this, but I will. I will.
Didn't the director of Yuri on Ice, the person who animated it recently, be like, they're friendship rings?
So here's, I have, my problem with Yuri on Ice can be described in 3 parts.
Oh boy.
Here's my 5-paragraph essay. No. So, my first point being that Yuri and Victor do not even once tell each other, consummate their relationship in any way, and no, kissing doesn't count. Part 2, they don't end up together. Like, their relationship is based off of somebody performing something for someone else. And then the relationship can happen. And my third point being that Yuri and Victor, their whole dynamic is based off of deception and deceit, and something that isn't portrayed until very close to the end of the episode. So I'll start with my first point. Yuri and Victor do not once tell each other that they love each other or anything like that. I know there are rings, and I know that there are, you know, I've heard people say, oh, in Japanese culture, it's very impolite to be forward with your feelings like that. So Victor is a Russian man who gets to be as eccentric and flamboyant as I want. So if we apply that same logic, then he should be able to go back to Russia while Chechnya is still a thing, right? So that's kind of the logic that I present towards that point. Number 2. Yuri and Victor sort of base their relationship off of him winning gold medal at an ice skating competition. Spoiler alert, he doesn't win, so they don't get together. Have any of you seen Stardust?
Yes.
It's a great LGBT movie if you haven't seen it. It's a fantasy movie about a young man who, with his girlfriend is not the best person. They watch a shooting star fall to the ground, off in the distance, off in like the far distance, and she says, "Bring that star to me, and then I'll love you." And it's sort of like his hero's journey of finding out that the star is actually this woman who has this special power, and there's Robert De Niro as a cross-dressing pirate. It's great. You should definitely check it out. It is a sleeper hit of the 2000s. Setting standards before you can do a relationship, like do this for me, and then I'll date you, is something that I just personally don't see as healthy. Like something that a relationship should be a natural thing that happens between two people. And though they do, I will concede that they do admit attraction towards one another and that they may or may not be LGBT. We don't know that because they don't consummate the relationship at all. There's no real way of establishing that. And my third point, the manner in which Yuri and Victor know each other is based entirely off of deception. In the 10th episode of the show, we find out that Yuri and Victor had met previously before Victor became his coach at the beginning of the show. At a gala for ice skaters, Yuri is a nervous mess who has one too many drinks and gets incredibly intoxicated. It is at this point that Yuri begins swirling around, pole dancing, being a little bit more provocative, and then he forces himself upon Victor and begs him drunkenly to be his coach. It is at this point that Victor strongly considers becoming Yuri's coach, which has a lot of implications. Because like the whole dynamic is Victor trying to coax Yuri out of his shell and become more comfortable with himself and more expressive in his skating, and part of that is being a little bit more provocative. And if that entire point is based off of Victor finding Yuri when he's drunk, hi.
First of all, this is not like a criticism of what you're saying. I agree with a lot of your criticism of Yuri on Ice. I actually have multiple friends who are obsessed with it, and I'm one of the few people who's like, But here's my thing. I absolutely loved it, and my feelings are that if they had just at some point acknowledged the relationship, all of these other points would kind of be put to the side. Like the whole like drunk thing. Like if at some point he's like, oh, your silliness is what made me originally start being interested in you. Like then if at some point that was acknowledged, then that wouldn't be like a big deal. Or if some point like the acknowledgement of what was going on, like I think it would just fix everything in the show.
Communication is an important part of
it. Wow! Communication.
So
yeah.
easy, but so difficult.
I know.
I did want to say, I did feel like the whole kissing the gold and everything, and he has to win the gold for them to have a relationship, that wasn't serious. That was more of him joking around, where, oh, I'll give you a kiss if you get the gold.
I'll give you a kiss.
Yeah, I didn't feel like that was like a huge thing.
And that's, I could have interpreted that wrong when I did watch it.
I felt like that was him joking around because with his personality, he's a little flamboyant and a little silly, and I mean, he did like basically start having feelings for a guy who was acting silly and drunk. Yeah. And I felt like that's why the whole drunk thing didn't bother me, and that's why like a lot of that didn't bother me. The only thing that bothered me is they're putting so much effort into like putting on rings in front of a church and yet never communicate with them.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, CL?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was a lot, and I didn't mean to project it at any one person. It's just I've had a lot of people be like, "Why don't you like Yuri on Ice?" And I was like, "Well."
No, I definitely agree with your first
what I was
point.
asking.
Yeah, like your first point. That is just it's so true. The other stuff about the gold and the drunkenness. I think those are kind of like the only reason.
That is a little bit. That's you can split hairs there. I think.
Yeah, like I feel like if they were communicating properly, then that wouldn't be.
That wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's that. I'm glad we got through that. Yeah. Okay, I feel better.
No, you are completely valid in your criticism.
Ooh. Any other questions? Anybody else? Hi.
I was just curious, what is your favorite character with a problematic representation?
Oh, God. I think my favorite character with a problematic representation. I don't know. I have to think about it. I think Team Rocket. I think the English dub kind of portrayed them as like goofy, over the top, in some cases queer-coded villains. Fun fact, Meowth was originally voiced by a trans woman. Maddie Blaustein is her name. Rest in power, Maddie Blaustein. So, I mean, in the original version of the anime, there are these complicated characters who are literally scraping together to survive. They are the worst members of Team Rocket, literally ever. They can't even catch one Pokemon, and they're constantly being berated by their boss, but they still find some way to keep going and to keep up good spirits, even if they can't catch a literal yellow mouse. And in the show, it's just like, ooh, I'm James. Surrender now or prepare to fight. And it's like, come on. It's 2018 and I'm watching an episode from like 30 years ago, but I have rose-colored glasses, rose-tinted glasses for a lot of early Pokemon. So, yeah, I think that's what I would say preliminarily. Hi.
Thoughts on the Pokemon episode where James has inflatable breasts?
It's obvious that that was a gag, and I think this is the one time I agree with 90s censorship changing something. Yeah. By the way, have y'all seen the compilation from Sailor Moon of the cousins? Oh. Can we do that? Yes. I need to just...
What about these puzzling characters, Neptune and Uranus?
Puzzling characters?
Oh, look! Here come Amara and Michelle. Oh, great. Why do you think they've entered the contest? They're girls and cousins, too.
Oh, heck.
Oh, Michelle!
Fantastic! You're the best cousins in the world!
How'd you guys meet then?
We're cousins. We grew up together.
Huh?
We've been inseparable since we were born. We can almost read each other's minds.
Like best friends?
You can't blush like that and say best friends, I'm sorry. That's literally not how the law works.
Mama's already got a best friend. Her name is Michelle, remember?
My cousin wants to know if you'd like to race her again. If you do, she's waiting over at the pool right now.
I'm glad you couldn't make it. I hope my cousin Amara didn't force you.
The sea is roaring, cousin. Get to the motocross training ground, quick!
Sailor Uranus, surrender. Or this is the end of the road for your cousin here.
Neptune!
Have to try and find her. You can't just abandon
the arms of
your cousin. Come on, let's go get Neptune. She's your family. What's the matter with you?
I'm trying to tell you that your dear cousin Sailor Neptune is the holder of a pure heart crystal.
For now, you've managed to stop me.
But don't worry, I haven't taken away your cousin's pure heart crystal yet.
My sport is worth so much to me that I sometimes forget all about happiness. But it is as it should be, and my cousin and my other good friends take care of my social life. So you see, I'm not lonely without a boyfriend. I don't think about it at all.
Of course not! This is by far the worst offender of the entire series.
Not at all. It seems so long ago, my first kiss.
Not for me, Amara. It feels like it was yesterday. It was so magical.
Oh.
I remember it vividly. It was with Brad, the cutest guy in the school.
Her name is Brad.
Leave it to me, Kase.
So naturally, when Viz started redubbing the show a couple of years ago, they went back, they used the original translation, Sarita became Usagi, and the cousins were happily left out of the script. They're lesbians again, so if you watch the Viz version of Sailor Moon, there are no cousins. Oh, here's another example. Remember card captor Sakura, her brother Satoshi? His very, very clear boyfriend. Did anybody watch Card Captor Sakura?
Yeah.
Yes. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think I'm all set if y'all are good. Thank you again so much for sticking through me this entire panel. It means a lot. Enjoy the rest of your convention. I have one more panel tomorrow at 3 o'clock. It's No Bummers, the McElroy family and inclusivity in comedy. I cannot wait to see some of you there. Thank you again so much for joining me today. Have a great rest of your weekend if we don't see each other again.